Amy Payne is in our panel today. She began her professional career working in higher education publishing, and she returned to get her MFA in literature at San Francisco State University. And she's been a teacher there. She's been a teacher here in the local community. I really like a quote that's on her website, which you need to go see if you haven't seen it yet. And that is that great writing changes the world, and steeped in admiration for the honest voices that bravely do their best to render the truth and beauty of both the human condition and the world on every page. Many of you were part of the group a short time ago where we discussed her book, How to Be a Good Neighbor. She's written an amazing essay or story on abortion that she shared with me, so that's to come at some point. And she's won awards, and I know she gets embarrassed when you talk about these kinds of things, but Amy, we're very proud of you as a member of this church and for all the things that you do. So welcome to our panel. And then continuing, Dr. Linda Clever, who has so many accomplishments in medicine and is still lecturing at Stanford University and participating in a lot of workshops and other things related to her nonprofit Renew. But when she gave me information to give her intro, she talked about voting and her grandfather, who declined to run for lieutenant governor of Washington State, saying there's no way for a poor man to stay honest in politics. He later ran for judge and won by one vote, and he voted for himself. So that's a good lesson there in understanding the responsibility of voting. I think Linda has so much vitality and does so many things. She works from so many different points of view, and as a physician, she said, I see that health policy and therefore health depends on who is elected. It's the same as with any cause. We must connect the dots between good health, good education, public safety, climate, the environment, peace, and, well, voting. So she's here to be on our panel. And then also from our congregation, Dr. Leslie Field, the amazing Leslie Field. She takes on small projects. Like the world's most urgent problem, climate. And she has academic degrees in engineering from MIT and UC Berkeley. She's taught for years at Stanford University, has business and industrial experience working with Chevron Research and Hewlett Packard Labs. She's founded successful businesses, has a new nonprofit that's getting started. She has over 60 patents, and she has experiences running nonprofits that address climate change. And I know she sings too. She's been here in the choir with us. And so it's just great to have Leslie talk with us today. And then from our community here in Ladera, there's Steve Gadol. And growing up, his passion was music. He's a clarinet player. So Eric, if you need a clarinet duo. So he was also interested in history, and as a child at the time, he was fascinated by the space program. And later, his college focus changed to software development and software architecture, where he spent over 30 years working in computer-related businesses here in Silicon Valley. And now he's traveling. He's a wonderful photographer. I've seen his photography, and it's a pleasure to see. He's a good cook too. He invited Stella and I over to their house for dinner one night, and it was wonderful. So maybe we'll get some more of that. But also, he's very interested in politics and nonprofits, and he gets down at the grassroots level. He works with Indivisible here in Portola Valley and is on the board of trustees of Vote Riders. And both of those organizations, I remember Linda Clever and Steve got in touch with me when I first came to the church, and they have been so instrumental in sort of getting out the vote, not just here but everywhere in the country. And so, Steve, we're really glad to have you here with us today. And I'm going to turn you guys over to Curt, and come on up and have a seat.
Thank you.
Are we working? So we're going to start with Linda, then Steve, up on the Zoom. Oh, it's okay. Over. Did you hear that? Linda, Steve, Leslie.
Good morning. What a pleasure to be here. Take this off for a moment. Just wanted to say why social justice, your team has been focused on voting. There are really two reasons. One is that it's important for each person's future and indeed for our right to practice our faith. This is voting and faith, our way, are essentially linked. Also, voting is necessary for many reasons, and it is imperiled in the United States. We've focused on two elements of voting. One is civil discourse, which reflects how people feel about each other, how people treat each other, and whether or not people trust each other. And we've also focused on voting itself. And just to start with civil discourse, there are three elements. There are 50 elements of civil discourse. Boiling it down to three, one is listen to understand, not reply. And that means that you listen to what a person says and absorb it and not be thinking, well, this is what I'm going to say back to them. Second is be curious without being judgmental. And the third is state your information sources and ask someone for their information sources so you know kind of where they're coming from. So those are just some fundamentals of civil discourse. And we've, as you can tell from our record that's in the handout, we've been engaged in that. Then there's voting itself. And there are four parts to voting. One is voting registration. Another is being able to vote. Another is getting out the vote. And another is counting the vote. And just thinking about those four elements. Voter registration, for example, in Ohio, if you have aged out of the foster care system, in order to vote in Ohio, you have to show your original birth certificate, because they don't want people in the foster care system to vote. Vote Riders, which you'll hear about and you'll see about in the handout, is all about voter registration and ID. Second, being able to vote is all about redistricting and many other encouragements or disencouragements or discouragements from voting. And the Brennan Center of NYU and Common Cause and the League of Women Voters are involved in that. Then getting out the vote, there, for example, are millions of people between the ages of 18 and 35 who've never voted. And so Feel Good Action and others that you'll read about that we've also brought here are about getting out the vote. And then counting the vote. Another statistic is 1/3 of local election officials felt it unsafe to have their jobs because of threats to them. And that's information from the Brennan Center. People have been threatened with hanging. People have been threatened with harm to their children. And grandparents have canceled family gatherings because they're afraid of what happened to their children because they are election officials. So you do have to connect the dots. Your vote determines the future of your causes, of what you believe in. Parks, public safety, climate, health, education, gun control, saving democracy in America. So we wanted to leave you with some to-dos, not just polemics. One is to read the book on tyranny, which I have here and we'll read a little bit from. Another is to pay attention. and that's Mary Oliver. You know, she wrote Introductions for Living a Life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And that means for us all to vote, for us to encourage everyone we know to vote, especially young people, and get involved. And I just wanted to show you this book on tyranny. It's only this big. There's also a graphic version of it, and it's by Timothy Snyder, who is a professor of history at Yale. And he focuses a lot on Eastern Europe. The book is from 2017. But one of the 20 things he says is, beware the one-party state. The parties that remake states and oppressed rivals were not omnipotent from the start. They exploited a historic moment to make political life impossible for their opponents. So, support the multi-party system and defend the rules of democratic elections. Vote in local and state elections while you can. Consider running for office. Thank you.
Hi, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. Two of my passions for the last couple of decades have been exactly what this panel is about. The climate and all of the threats to our way of life as it's evolving toward higher heat and all kinds of problems, and passion for democracy. So let me start with some comments about democracy and why I've been involved. Being a political activist was probably well below the bottom of my list of things that I thought I would ever be doing. But I went into a state of shock after the 2016 election. I had done some research on Trump, and I was very, very concerned that he might get elected. And when he did, it was very, very difficult for me to digest that. So when two staffers who had been in Congress for a while formed a new organization, a grassroots organization called Indivisible, I was one of the founding members of the chapter here. And today, along with Linda, I serve on basically our leadership council. Through that association with Indivisible and basically a wholehearted effort to get out as much vote as we could in the 2018 midterms, I was introduced to Vote Riders. Now, Vote Riders is a kind of unique organization in this field because they do something that very few other organizations really focus on, and they are by far the largest. Their goal is to make sure that nobody's kept out of the voting booth because they can't get the documentation that they need in order to get registration and be allowed to vote in that state. And they provide a whole group of services. There's a handout that we had some copies of it out on the table. Curt's holding it up, and that will be on the website along with the web address for Vote Riders. So you can go out and find out all of what they do, but it's quite extensive. After serving for about a year on that and having helped raise a fair amount of funds for Vote Riders, the leader of Vote Riders offered me a position on their board of trustees. That's basically the fundraising agency, which I accepted, and I'm still part of that. Moving ahead a little bit, as the 2018 elections turned out well, and then as the 2020 election came into focus, I was once again quite a bit concerned about the deterioration of our democracy. And after the 2020 election, the reaction of Trump and his followers was, to me, really shocking. During the spring, I started to think about, especially as I heard a lot of commentary and saw a lot of polls that said that there was much more enthusiasm from his supporters than there was from the other side. I started to think about what kind of thing would be a strategy that would really help get the vote out and be able to do well in the 2022 midterms. And working with the other members of our council, we put together a strategy. And I was sort of the main leader on that. I wrote quite a bit of it. I won't go into the details of it because it's, as Curt will explain, it will be available, or if you really want to see it, you can get in touch with me or the IPV Council, and we'll be more than happy to send you the whole thing. But I just want to give you a few comments about why I did it. I realized that solving this was a very complex problem, that in addition to the kind of get out the vote effort that had worked very well for us in 2018, that there was a pool of voters that were not really being touched. And I wanted to see if we could figure out a good way to get them involved. And those are the people who were long-term members of the Republican Party for 100 years after the Civil War. Comes as a shock to a lot of the young people here, but the Republican Party was actually the progressive element in this country. And suddenly, this new thing appears, it's calling itself the Republican Party, but it doesn't have any of the values that the Republican Party had. One of the things that really made democracy work in this country for a long time was that even though the parties would violently at times argue with each other about policies of taxation and limited government versus more extensive government, they had the same foundation. They believed in one man, one vote, and a democracy. And suddenly, we had a group that wasn't really favoring democracy at all. So I thought that if we could get a number of people from that older group of Republicans who were disenchanted with what was happening to see what was going on, they might want to join in on an effort not to elect one party or another, but to make sure democracy survived in the United States. And that's really what this document we call A Strategy to Save Democracy in America is about. And I hope that you'll get a chance to take a look at that. So then let me move on to, yeah.
I told Jeff and the team that my job was to corral the panel. I'm afraid not the news, the corral is closing.
Okay.
We've run out of time on your part, but there'll be time later.
Okay.
But I do want to say about what you've just said is so important. And I'm sorry. Thank you. Once again, the social justice team feels it's very important to go into that strategy in detail and review it and understand it, and then disseminate it as appropriate. We were going to try to hand it out today, for example, but said, no, we're going to work on it, and it's going to be a very productive work we're going to do. We'll invite Steve to some of that effort. But I need to cut Steve off right now from the second half of his panel, his discussion, which was about climate. And you can come in at the end to say more things, but Leslie can take over because she's deeply involved with climate, of course. So we'll hear from you now, Leslie, and then I'll say a brief word about Bill McKibben, and then Amy can finish with, what's it called?
Sorry, I was muted. Third act.
Thank you, Amy.
All right, so do you want to, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Want me to begin, Curt? I guess so.
Please.
Okay, here we are. Thanks. So, good morning. I am really honored to be here as part of this wonderful panel and to have been invited to talk about my work in climate. I hope this holds to the 3-minute limit I'm aiming for. Many of you know that I started working on climate in 2006 after having seen the Al Gore movie An Inconvenient Truth, which started me on what I fondly called my inconvenient hobby of looking for a safe and inexpensive material to increase reflectivity in the Arctic, to slow one of the most important feedback loops that is still accelerating climate change. The disappearance, basically, of reflective ice in many areas of the world. In 2008, I founded a nonprofit, Ice 911 Research, recently renamed Arctic Ice Project, to develop the idea further, and as it turns out, the approach shows some real promise. In I've recently left Arctic Ice Project to found a new nonprofit, Bright Ice Initiative, to do the complementary work. So in parallel is my view. We should act as not two competing canoes, but a catamaran, I hope, to do the complementary work of tackling glacial ice melt, working with local and indigenous experts and universities to tackle immediate and urgent problems, such as the challenges that the Himalayan ice melt poses to water supplies for over 1 billion people, and the challenges that Greenland's ice melt poses to sea level rise that threatens coastal communities around the world. I hope, in fact, we will actually eventually get to address Antarctica too, but that is much, while it's urgent, it's much more expensive to get to. In addition, I've taught an annual class at Stanford for 12 years, which some of you have audited. You're all welcome to listen to the recordings if you'd like. You just have to contact me and make sure that I get back to you because life is kind of busy. And the class is on engineering, entrepreneurship, and climate change. Because, why do I do that in addition? Because helping the next generation face what I believe will be the challenge of their lives can help them and potentially all of life on Earth. And finally, I also believe the arts can help in this. I was really honored to have a children's author contact me and to dedicate a book on my work. Well, okay, it shows up. Tracy Blom, beautiful little book about saving the Arctic. And a children's book, I think, is a wonderful thing here. And I'm privileged to be part of an international group who's working right now to organize a concert to raise funding to help save the glaciers. PV Palooza, our own town concert coming up in Portola Valley, has agreed to support our work. The Cultural Arts Committee just agreed to that by contributing recordings of some of the live music upcoming at Town Center on June 11th as part of the virtual concert that we're going to be doing, which is to be aired online during the time of COP27 in November. And with the help of my music major son, I'm writing my own song to record as well. We need more music of all stripes to fill out the concert, so let me know if you're interested. And if you would like to hear it, I could give you right now, live, embarrassingly, possibly, a very rough glimpse of my song. Curt, I leave it to you to decide whether you have time or interest. Just know that it exists, and it's still very, very rough.
Is it less than a minute?
It could be, yeah. Let's try it.
Go for it.
Okay, so imagine James Bond chords, which I will sing, and ongoing urgent metronome beat underneath when I start actually singing, but time's almost gone, no, I hate it when that happens. Time's almost gone to act on climate change. The ice is melting, the storms are raging, the fires are burning the land. So much is gone, so much is changing before our eyes, but still there's beauty and still there's life that we can preserve if we can be wise. This can't be for greed or for glory. We must act to save all we still can by learning and acting together. The future's in all of our hands. And that's all as far as I've gotten. Oh, okay. Phew. Guess we'll continue. Yeah, my music major son is helping me figure out how to make this finite and orchestrate it and all. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to talk with you all.
Thank you, Leslie. That was a beautiful treat. Thank you so much for the music, too.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I miss singing with y'all, I have to say.
Okay.
Yep.
And we're doing okay on time, but it'd be nice if Amy and I can finish off. So just Bill McKibben, we all know the name maybe, but we're not quite sure. 350.org is what he started in 2008. He always says co-founder of these things. He was born in Palo Alto, 1960, went on to Harvard. After Harvard, he joined the New Yorker for 5 years, and prolific writer, and he wrote a lot about the environment. In fact, over a dozen books about environment. In '89, he wrote what a title, The End of Nature. And at that point, it was the first book for the common public about global warming. It was understandable, and it motivated him to become an activist. So in the 90s and then in the aughts, he was involved in protests and marches and gatherings and so forth, worked really hard on Earth Day things in front of the UN in New York and in Washington, helped Obama cancel the pipeline, 2 different pipelines with his gatherings. So what a guy, Bill McKibben. Well, right now, he's turned the corner. Oh, I need to get I'm sorry, just take a second, it's worth it. In fact, the title of the book, his forthcoming book, actually is the introduction to Amy's panel, in a way. So I have to read you the title of the book. The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. So there you go, Amy. Please introduce us and invite us to be with the third act.
Okay. All right, thanks, Curt. Can you all hear me? Okay. All right, wonderful. I'm setting my timer. And first of all, it's amazing to see all of your faces. Hello from Green, Vermont. Curt asked me if I would speak about Third Act, which is an organization I'm just tapping into. Is it working, Grover? Okay. The background for me is simply that back, I don't know, when, especially beginning in 2016, as it became more and more dire and the country was doing less and less, and there were more protests, the thing I kept hearing people my age and older say was, thank goodness for the young people, they're gonna save us. And it really troubled me because I knew that while the young people had the passion, they didn't have the resources that they needed. So fast forward to when my own young person went to Minnesota on a pipeline protest along with so many other people, and McKibben was there. He was one of the organizers. And that really launched me into the thought of what is it that I do that isn't just signing what is it called we sign? You know, act or giving money or whatever. And Bill McKibben began Third Act. He began it because the Third Act is people 60 and older. It's his generation. It's the silent generation, it's the great generation, and it's the baby boomers. There are 70 million people in that group, and it's growing every day. He formed this because that group both, as he says, votes like heck. We are prolific voters, and we are also the most well-resourced set of generations. More than 70% of the country's assets are in the hands of people 60 and older. The millennials, for example, hold about 5% of the country's assets. And if you've been watching what makes the country work, it's money. And if you've been watching what makes banks listen and politicians listen, it's money. So his goal was to tap into the early activism that's part of these generations, the wisdom now, and the resources that we hold. So McKibben and Akaya Winwood, who is a transformation facilitator, are the lead advisors of the organization, and Vanessa Akara is the president and co-founder. Akaya Winwood is in Oakland, and she's really, I think she is like a rock star. Their main focus, they decided that they had to stay really focused, because if you do everything, you don't do anything well. Their main focuses are environment and voting rights. Within those two, they say equity and justice is held in all realms. And without those two, they go away. Their structure is national, and they're creating working groups across the country by location and by affiliation. You can join, like I've found the Vermont working group. You could be in a teacher group, an educator, a spiritual group, a business person group, nurses. Their two main focuses right now are Protect Our Vote, which has multiple threads, and Bug the Banks, which is actually an enormous, the banks are one of the major funders of fossil fuel industry. So, and then they've been registering high school seniors, postcard writing, letters to the editor workshops, and then they're actually organizing actions too. The Sunrise movement of young people has asked for Third Act's support, and Third Act members have been showing up at Sunrise events. My involvement is just beginning because it took me a while. I've gone to some of their seminars. They're really good, and they're easy to find. One's in the bulletin, I guess, coming up this Wednesday. You can go on their website, find Third Act, and it will tell you when the basic informational webinar is. And then it will tap you into everything else that's going on, and you can figure out what you're interested in, how much and how little. So I have promised to divest from Wells Fargo, which is my bank, within a year if they don't take real action with their fossil fuel investment. And it terrifies me, but it's critical. So I will end. Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which I think is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, is on the board. And she said that in the Potawatomi tradition, quote, elderhood is not a time for stepping back, but for stepping up, for stepping into your own power. Becoming an elder is both a precious gift and a serious responsibility, a responsibility for sharing knowledge and for safeguarding the future of life. We have the knowledge, and I think what the world is looking for from us is the safeguarding action next. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Amy, and the rest of the panel. This empty chair here is for Jeff. We don't have time anymore, but he was going to do kind of a closure of our work and affirmation of it, I hope, and maybe a chance for questions and so forth. But we're not. We don't need it. There's been a self-closure here. Now, Steve has maybe one word or two that he wants to say, but only one or two.
Okay. On the climate work, what I wanted to mention to you is a course that I found extremely valuable. It's based on a lot of the data that the international group, part of the UN, the IPCC, has gathered on climate change. But it also has a very optimistic viewpoint, because what it says is that we have technologies that are there now. Some of them are actual products. Others are emerging very quickly. And it makes an important point. And the important point is that the solution to this global climate problem is going to be driven by economics, not just by environmental concerns. It has to be a real effort that involves government, corporate, and people, popular support. Corporations looking at this new technology will see that it's actually, in many ways, will increase their profits, not cut them. The government needs to be there for those stragglers who don't want to play ball right away. And of course, there has to be popular support for it, or the politicians won't. So I'll just recommend that to you. And there are some slides and some information on the website.
Thank you. Well done, Steve.